whenever great tragedies strike in the Jewish world, as unfortunately has happened many times in our history, there is always a reaction, messianic reaction to events that's based on the idea mentioned many times in Tanakh and the Bible that the messianic era, the era of redemption, is comparable, compared to a woman giving birth, to the travails of labor. And just as the process of giving birth is associated with pain, great pain, and associated with difficulties, but at the end, so to speak, it's all worth it because the baby comes out and new life is created. So too the process of the arrival of the Messiah, the process of messianic redemption, is preceded by a period of travail, of labor, of pain, of suffering. And therefore, whenever there were traumatic experiences within the Jewish world of great suffering, it was always followed by some sort of messianic or redemptive movement that arose in order to, so to speak, explain or even justify the suffering. The great question that all of us face in life, both as individuals and as a nation, the great question is why? Why do things happen? Why? That's the great question that hovers over the Holocaust. It hovers over the Gulag. It defies any rational explanation. Why such things happen? What motivates people to behave in such a fashion? And especially as regards the Jewish people, why should such things happen? And we all know that the answer to the question why is never found. There never is an answer. So you have to, so to speak, live with the question. Now, sophisticated people like me are able to live with the question. But unsophisticated people like you always look for an answer. And because we always look for an answer, many of the answers that are given, so to speak, are not really, not just they're not correct, they beg the question, or they trivialize the question. So the fact that the redemption is going to follow this great period of pain or this traumatic event is a nice answer to why. But in all of Jewish history, it has never proven to be the answer, because all of the messianic movements until today have proven to be dead ends, have proven to be movements that not only didn't bring redemption, but most of the time brought sadness and despair in their wake. So I want to talk to you about the events of 1648 and 1649, Xeros Tach V'Tat, which almost destroyed Eastern European Jewry, and until World War I would be seen as probably the greatest tragedy that befell Ashkenazic Jewry, greater than the Crusades, greater than the persecutions of the Black Death, of the bubonic plague in the 14th century. Because here we're talking about an annihilation of a large section of world Jewry, an annihilation that was perpetrated with tremendous barbarity and was simply based upon hatred and not upon any logical sort of reasoning. In 1648, the Ukrainian Nationalists by the name of Bogdan Khmelnytsky mounted a rebellion. The rebellion was basically against the Polish landlords who owned much of the property in the Ukraine, and most of the people in the Ukraine were little more than slaves. They were serfs. In fact, the serfs in Russia were not free till 1863 by the Tsar Alexander. And the serf had no rights. He had to stay on the land, he had to farm, couldn't leave. He was literally a slave. And most of the serfs were illiterate, and many of them were alcoholic, abusive, violent. It was an awful life. Khmelnytsky was a Ukrainian nationalist who wanted to free the Ukrainian serfs from the yoke of the Polish landlords. So that sounds noble. Many ideas sound noble, but when they come to practical behavior, then they turn inhuman. They turn to be worse than the wrong that they intend to correct. One of the problems that the Western world faces today is that because it thinks that there may be a moral right that people have because of injustices or difficulties or poverty, that therefore they have the right to do anything to end it. And not only is that itself immoral, but it's counterproductive always to the right that, so to speak, is intended to be corrected. In any event, the Jews found themselves in a very precarious position. The Jews in Poland and the Ukraine basically were agents of the Polish landlords. They were rent collectors. Nobody likes the guy that comes to collect rent. I remember that when I was quite young, which was not so long ago, that and I was trying to earn some money. So I was offered by someone that I knew, an older person, a job to go collect rent from his tenants in a certain neighborhood in Chicago. I went once, and that cured me for the rest of my life. So the Jew was a rent collector. The Jew was also the producer and seller of liquor. Jews were in the liquor business in Eastern Europe. A Bronfman family that owned Schenley. So Bronfman is a Yiddish word meaning, Bronfman means liquor, whiskey. Now the people that sold liquor also were not necessarily universally admired because of the fact that in their way they encouraged alcoholism, and they took whatever money these poor people had because they had to feed their habit of alcohol abuse. The Jews also were in the money lending business. Today we call it banking. So banking has a nice sound to it. But to be a money lender has a more negative sound to it. And especially in those periods of time, the interest rates were usurious. They were abysmal. You're talking 30-40% interest. No one ever could pay off the loan. It was the same type of loans that the mafia gives to people. And these are loans that are perpetual. So the Jews found themselves in these very unpopular occupations. The reason the Jews were in those occupations is because those were the only occupations that they were allowed to participate in. They were forbidden by either by law or by custom from being anything else. As late as 1860, there was only one registered Jewish pharmacist in all of Poland. Jews were not allowed to attend universities. The professions were closed to them. To be a merchant required some capital, which Jews never had. The Jews also were in the timber business, logging. They also had small skills, tailoring, shoemaking, house repairs, carpentry. But there was no substantial Jewish economic force in Eastern Europe in the 17th century. So what happened was that when Chmielnicki mounted this rebellion, and he said he's going to destroy the Polish landlords, the Jews were in the forefront of the destruction, because to most of the serfs, they represented the Polish landlord. The Polish landlord lived on an estate, in a mansion somewhere in Poland. They never saw him. He never visited. So the Jew was the one that was the representative. He was the one that was in the front line. And therefore, it's not hard to imagine why the fury of the rebellion of the serfs poured over the Jewish community. Chmielnicki also organized the Cossacks, who were a fierce, warlike tribe, who also wanted their independence. The Cossacks fought for their independence even as late as the 1930s to try and be free of Russia. And these forces, the Ukrainian Nationalists and the Cossacks, unleashed a reign of terror that lasted 5 years, 1648 to 1653. Chmielnicki died in 1653. There's a large statue of Chmielnicki mounted on a horse in the main square in Kiev. To the Ukrainians still today, he is a hero. One man's hero is someone else's villain. To us, Chmielnicki is a word that belongs in the same category as Hitler and Stalin. Probably add Arafat to the list too. About 250,000 Jews were killed in this uprising, which eventually ended up going nowhere. The Poles and the Russians put it down eventually, and things were restored to their original base, except the entire Jewish infrastructure of Eastern Europe was torn up because the rebellion crossed from the Ukraine into Poland, into Lithuania, into Belarus, and the yeshivas, the institutions, the rabbis, everyone who was not destroyed fled, was on the move, and therefore when the whole thing subsided, you had a Jewish society that was just reeling. Now, 250,000 Jews was small change in the 1940s, when over 6 million were destroyed. It was a small change in Stalin's Russia, where 18 million went to the Gulag. There's a new book, by the way, if you have a chance to read. You do read, I hope. It's called Gulag, by a Jewish woman, Ann Applebaum. It's a terrifying book. But you're talking 18 million people, yeah? So in our world where millions are destroyed, so when you get down to hundreds of thousands, that's only small change, right? So we see that Black Africa and Rwanda and other places. So it's only 200,000 that were killed. So, you know, the world doesn't get nervous from 200,000. You know, the ante has to be raised much higher in our time. But for the Jewish world, 250,000 Jews then was a large percentage of Eastern European Jewry, probably 15 to 20%. Aside from those that were killed, there were many hundreds of thousands that were maimed, both physically and mentally. There were horrific atrocities. We have a book that records the events of the time, written by Rabbi Nosson Hanover. It's called Yevein HaMetzula, The Abyss of Despair. It's been translated into English. There are a number of translations that are available. And it's not pleasant reading. The difference, we could say the difference between 1648 and let's say 1942 is that in 1648 you had to kill everybody by hand. So by 2, 3 in the afternoon you got tired. Couldn't do it anymore, not because you didn't want to, but you got tired. But when killing became mechanized, industrialized, from machine guns to gas chambers to starvation camps, so then you can know the gas chamber never gets tired, and therefore it's much more efficient in its work, and can therefore kill so many more people without any problems or interference. So one of the features of our time is that mass killing is possible in a way that has never before been possible in human history. Nuclear weapons, biological weapons, just plain 500-ton bombs. You're able to do a lot with a little. In the good old days, as I mentioned, everybody had to be killed by a sword, by a knife, you know, everybody had to be killed by hand. That takes time, takes effort. Eventually it runs out of gas. So after 1648 and 1649, the Jewish world is ripe for messianic movement, because you know, with 1648 and 1649, you couldn't say that the Jews were not observant, or that the Jews were socialists, or the Jews were Zionists, or the Jews were enlightened, or whatever the excuses that somehow are offered up, let's say, regarding the Holocaust, which in my opinion are invalid excuses. They shouldn't even be mentioned. But people try to do so, as I mentioned before. But here in 1648, 1649, everybody's a good Jew, right? Everybody's putting on film. Everybody's a Sabbath observer. Everybody's eating kosher. There are no deviationists, so to speak. So how did it happen? Why did it happen? Well, the Lord is obtuse in all of these subjects. He never answers our question. The finite can never understand the infinite. It's Maimonides posits that idea. Kilo Yerani Hodam V'choi, God said to Moshe. Living human beings will never see me, will never understand. And that's deeply disconcerting to us, because basically we're very nosy people. And we like to know everything, and we like to understand everything, and how come? I always tell the story about the the man that celebrated his 100th birthday. And the family had a party, and all the friends came over. And they asked him, how come you lived so long? And he said, well, when he was younger, he used to have a lot of questions. One night he had a dream, and an angel came to him in the dream and said, you know, Rabbi Yankov, you have a lot of questions? And he said, yeah, I have, you know, I don't understand so many things, I want to know. So the angel said, well, if you'll come up here, we'll explain it all to you. But if you come up here, it's a one-way ticket. So he said, since then, I don't have any questions. Right? So he lived to be 100 because he doesn't, you know, he's not interested to find out the answers. The moral of that Jewish joke, that Jewish anecdote, is that the answers are beyond us. And that being finite and being mortal, we are limited in understanding. And therefore things happen. They happen all the time. They happen to individuals. The great question that the book of Eov, the book of Job presents, Tzadik v'ralo, Rosha v'tovlo. The righteous person suffers, the evil person is driving around in a Volvo. Nothing happens to him. How do you justify that? How do you justify tragedies? So we have no way to do that. And because we have no way to do it, people are frustrated to a certain extent. Sometimes you have a book by somebody like Harold Kushner, writes a book called Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. Sells millions of copies. His answer basically is, I don't know. But he couches it in the idea of randomness and everything, you know. But people want to read the book simply because that's such a valid question in life. And, you know, by the time you finish reading the book, you realize that you may not have got your $25 worth, but meanwhile, you got the book. So you have this tremendous, gnawing question of why did it happen? And the Messianic, as I mentioned before, the Messianic movements always prey upon this feeling and say that this is a prelude to the coming of the Messiah, the coming of the new world, the coming of the redemption of Israel and mankind, and therefore you'll see it was worth it. May not be worth it to the 250,000 people who got killed, but in the overall scheme, it somehow is justified. The imagery, again, of the woman in labor giving birth to a child. So it's not long in coming that somebody comes and establishes Messianic movement. So in Smyrna in Turkey, it is today Turkey, it was once Greece, it's the Ottoman Empire. There's a young man by the name of שבתאי Tzvi. שבתאi Tzvi in our world today would be diagnosed as a manic depressive. And he would be given drugs to take, medicine. But in the world of the 1600s, the disease, the mental disease of manic depressiveness is not known. And he's a very, very smart person. He's a very clever person, a very charismatic person. He's a great Talmudic scholar. And when he's manic, he can stay up 3 days in a row without going to sleep. And he can do when he's manic, he can do everything. And when he's depressed, he goes into bed for a week. But when you go into bed for a week, they don't say you're sick. They say he's contemplating. He's meditating. It's a meditational stage. He's being spiritual. Now, in our world, being spiritual is a pursuit that everyone engages in. From Madonna onwards, everyone is trying to be spiritual. And someone called me up about a certain person that they wanted information regarding, perhaps to go out and marry the person. And so they asked, the requisite questions, 15, 20 questions, which have nothing to do with reality. They never ask, will he take out the garbage? Which is a real question in life, right? Or other things that really set up the relationship. And then the last question is that person spiritual, they asked me. I said, I hope not. I mean, what does that mean? But we all long for that. And therefore, he was able to project this idea of spirituality. That's a holy person, meditates, stays in bed, doesn't want to be interrupted, doesn't want to talk to people. Now, you can't become a Messiah, until now at least, unless you have a good publicity agent. Somebody who's got to run the machine. So in Christianity, Jesus had Paul. Without Paul, there would be no Christian world today. Paul is the one that popularized it, spread it. Muhammad had also a great publicity machine that advanced the ideas of Islam. But here, שבתאי Tzvi travels, goes to Egypt, and then he comes to the land of Israel. And he meets somebody by the name of Nathan, and Nathan is from Gaza. He's called Nathan HaZosi, Nathan of Gaza. Now, there's a great difference of opinion amongst the scholars whether Nathan really believed in him or whether, it was just a con game from the beginning. Now, the problem with being a con man is that eventually you con yourself. Eventually, a liar believes one's own lies. So that the con man becomes the victim of his own con game. And that's what happened here. Whatever his intent was in the beginning, the reality of the matter was that Nathan, at the end, believed. And he believed that שבתאי Tzvi was the Messiah. And he had a gift of a pen. He sent letters all over the Jewish world. He sent to all of the great rabbis. He said the Messiah is here. And the Jewish people were in a state of mind, as I explained to you, that they were willing to accept. You're barely 150 years after the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, which is the traumatic event for Sephardic Jewry. You're not even 10 years after the events of 1648 and 1649, which is such a traumatic event for Ashkenazic Jewry. There seems to be no way out for the Jews of the exile and of the troubles of the exile and the persecutions both of the Muslim world and the Christian world. And so therefore, here comes a person who says he has the answer. He's the Messiah. He's going to lead us out of our troubles. Everybody should pack their bags and get ready to come to Zion. Now, it's interesting that a lot of Jews did that. Jews sold businesses, homes. We have the record of the Dutch East India Company of the time. Then in the 1600s, Holland was a major power in the world. And the Dutch East India Company wrote that it didn't have ships to send to the Spice Islands because the Jews leased all the ships, because they're going back to the land of Israel. In the diplomatic dispatches of the time between the representatives of government, all of this was noted. Gangs of Jewish youth invaded non-Jewish neighborhoods and beat up their tormentors. Because of the fact that, now that the Messiah is here, so we're going to take care of you, right? We're going to get even with you. And the entire Jewish world was in a turmoil, a ferment. And there were great rabbis that somehow supported Shabtai Tzvi. Shabtai Tzvi had one great nemesis, the rabbi in Amsterdam, whose name was Jacob Sasportas. Sasportas came from a Portuguese family. The Spanish and the Portuguese Jews had settled in Holland. Holland at one time belonged to Spain. It was called the Spanish Netherlands. But Holland, in the 30 Years' War, turned Protestant. Jews were, so to speak, protected there. If you go today to Amsterdam, you can see the great Spanish-Portuguese congregation. It was built in the 1630s. Great edifice. The Jews were wealthy. The Jews helped build the city of Amsterdam, and they helped build Holland generally as a naval and mercantile power. Rembrandt had Jewish patrons that sponsored him. That's why he painted so many Jewish subjects. And the Spanish-Portuguese synagogue is just breathtaking. They have a great candelabra in the middle of the synagogue that has 613 branches to it. It's lit only on Yom Kippur. They have a mahogany wall of where the Ark, where the Aron Kodesh is. It was matched mahogany wood that was brought from Recife, Brazil. It's one of the wonders, still one of the main tourist sites in Amsterdam. It was preserved by the Nazis because it was a national state protected artifact, and therefore they didn't destroy it. It was a synagogue across the canal, which was an Ashkenazic synagogue built only a few years later, which was destroyed because it did not have the protection of being a state museum, a state building. But the Germans were and are, very careful in many matters. So Sasportas saw through Shabtai Tzvi from the beginning. He said he's a phony, a fake. Terrible things will happen if we follow him, if we believe in him. He should be cast out from the Jewish people. He should have no effect upon us. Now, people don't like naysayers. People don't like others who say, the Messiah is not a Messiah, that this is no answer. People grope for answers. And we're willing, therefore, even to believe in things that rationally can't be, rather than to say, well, we just have no answer, we're going to live with no answer. So he had a lot of detractors. Not only detractors, they threw him out of town. Lost his position. He was driven from the town. And now he left a record, wonderful record of the times. It's his letters and the letters of rabbis back to him and of others. It's called Tzitzas Novel Tzvi, which is a play on words from the book of Eov, the book of Job, and it's a play on words. And he says Tzvi, meaning Shabtai Tzvi, is a flower that is withered. Flower that withers and dies away, and has no permanence and should not be believed or followed. So you had this split in the Jewish world between those who believed in him and those who did not believe in him. It's estimated that as much as 1/3 of the Jewish world did follow him. And we have many noted rabbis that wrote in his defense. And if you'll read the Rabbi Sosportis' book and the letters that he received, you'll see the different ideas as to why they felt that he should be supported. But Shabtai Tzvi was, he pushed the envelope too far. Firstly, he began to dress as though he were a king or an emperor. Now you're living in the Ottoman Empire, where the Sultan or whoever is in charge, doesn't like competition. He doesn't suffer it well. He holds court. Jews come to visit him from all over the world. They bring him presents, bring him money, gifts. Now, since the Ottoman Empire was corrupt, it really was more than corrupt. It wrote the handbook on corruption. He was able to buy them off. The Sultan got a percentage. And it was good business, because everybody that came had to pay, you had to pay a tax and to come in, to travel. It was a good business. But Shabtai Tzvi, then, again, as I told you, the people who are con men eventually con themselves. He came to believe that he was the Messiah. So the first thing that he did was abolish the fast days of the 9th of Av and the 17th of Tammuz. Those fast days that in Asora B'Tevis, those fast days which commemorate the destruction of the temple. Because he said those fast days are no longer necessary since the Messiah is here, so therefore we'll do away with those fast days. Then he took a further step in which he actually permitted the forbidden foods to be eaten. Now that already is not in the tradition of the Jewish people, because according to our tradition, no Messiah, no prophet, no one can somehow, make pork kosher. But he made a blessing out of it. He said, Matir Isurim. We have the blessing Matir Asurim. The Lord frees those who are bound, those who are in chains. And he changed it to read Matir, that becomes mutter, it becomes permissible. Isurim, prohibitions, are now permissible. And then he ended up marrying a 12-year-old girl who caught his fancy. And he claimed that she was spiritual. So all of this behavior made people nervous about him already. But again, there's nothing like a true believer. There's a wonderful little book by Eric Hoffer. Hoffer was a longshoreman in the United States in the 1960s, 70s, who was truly, he was non-Jewish, but he really was a lover of Israel and a lover of Jews. And he was a philosopher, even though he was a longshoreman. He worked on the docks. And he wrote a number of books in philosophy, beautiful books. But he wrote one book called, it's about 105 pages, it's called The True Believer, which is the study of really fanaticism, religious fanaticism, people that believe. And it's not just religious. The true believer is a communist. A true believer can be an anarchist. the true believer can be anybody. Anybody that believes in the ideal to such an extent that facts do not change his mind. When I was a lawyer, I had an office, so the senior partner in our firm had on his desk a sign that said, "Don't confuse me with the facts, my mind is made up." That's the true believer. We unfortunately face true believers today in the world, various kinds. So this true believer still believed in שבתאי tzvi, no matter what he did. Because a true believer commits oneself to such an extent that to be proven wrong is almost suicidal. Now, שבתאי tzvi was now proclaimed that he's going to lead the Jewish people back to Zion and Jerusalem. Going to take Jerusalem away from the Muslims, going to destroy the mosques, going to rebuild the temple on the Temple Mount. Now, the Sultan didn't like that. That was already open rebellion. So the Sultan had him arrested. And he brought him to Turkey. And there, שבתאי tzvi, under house arrest, continued to receive guests. He continued his court, so to speak. And after about a year of this, the Sultan became very tired of it. And he called him in and he said, "Listen, buddy, tomorrow I'm either going to behead you or you're going to convert publicly to be a Muslim. Those are your two choices." And שבתאי tzvi converted. He became a Muslim. Now you can imagine the consternation in the Jewish world when the person that said that he was the Jewish Messiah gives up the faith of Judaism and becomes a Muslim. But Nathan of Gaza, who's got this tremendous machine going, publicity machine, etc., he's got to keep it going. So he says, this is the true test now. Now is the true test. Who really believes? Until now, you could say, you believe, everything's up. But now, only the true believers will believe, right? They won't be shaken by the fact that he became a Muslim. And most of the followers of שבתאי tzvi deserted him, naturally. But there were hardcore of true believers that remained until the 18th century. There were Sabbateans in the 1700s yet, who were waiting for him after he died. He's coming back. Although once you start down that slippery road, then there's no end to it. Then he can come back from the dead, then he can do this, and he's running it from heaven. And so we have pictures of him sitting next to God, telling God what to do. Very, very dangerous phenomena. And so this brought a tremendous wave of depression in the Jewish world. Having no Messiah is one thing. Having a false Messiah is much worse. And here, because so much faith and belief, wealth, talent were invested in him by the Jewish world, and now it all went bankrupt. So the Jewish world, to a great extent, is shattered. Now, it's important for us to know that, because otherwise we cannot explain what follows. Why reform, why the Enlightenment, why Zionism, why Hasidism, Why Musar? Why all of these movements? All of these movements, in my opinion, are based upon the failure of Messianism. And therefore it became a different form of Messianism. Different way to get out of the exile. Until now, the Jews believed that the only way out of the exile was that the Messiah would come and take them. One day there'd be a notice on the bulletin board and that would be it. But after the debacle of Shabtai Tzvi, after the failure of this type of Messianism to lead anywhere, so then there came different answers. One, as we will discuss in the future, one of the answers is that we're never going to get out of the exile, and therefore we shouldn't view it as an exile, but they will become, good Germans of the Mosaic persuasion. Another answer is that we'll go by ourselves, forget about the Messiah, we'll do it ourselves, which basically is Zionism. Another answer is to create a different reality, different world in which Jews would operate, and that basically was the idea of Hasidus. All of these turbulent movements of the 18th and 19th centuries all are based upon the collapse of Shabtai Tzvi and the Messianic idea. So that when the Messiah comes, as he surely will, he'll have a major job proving it to us. Because the Jewish people once burned, here we've been burned more than once by false messiahs, are justifiably skeptical of those who claim messianic pretensions. In Yiddish, there's a great phrase that says that if you burn your tongue on hot soup, then you blow even on cold soup. And having burned ourselves many times on hot soup, so we are very careful, skeptical about it. There's a book by a professor from the Hebrew University by the name of Gershon Sholem. And the book is called Shabtai Tzvi, the False Messiah. So he has a theory about Kabbalah, that if it wouldn't have been for Kabbalah, Shabtai Tzvi never could have had a beginning. But if you disregard that idea, which may or may not be correct, it's a fixation almost with him. But the actual book itself, which is the biography of the man and the description of the times that he lived in, is well worth your while in reading, because it'll give you a picture of this event, watershed event in Jewish history, and it'll help explain to us how many of the things that followed almost had to come into being, because it was started, the catalyst for all of it was this messianic movement that bankrupted and that saddened and depressed the Jewish people, took the air out of the balloon, so to speak, and left us with no other choices. And therefore we have to look for other choices to see how to improve the Jewish situation.